All right, hello everybody. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about. I thought, not because I think it's going to be particularly helpful, but because I think it might be funny. Honestly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of brainstorming the title of my novel. Right, I ended up at Pursuit of the Heliotrope, but how the hell did I get there? Right, so I'm bad with titles. At least that's my impression, is that I'm bad with titles. And so I find myself having to think about them for a long time before I arrive at something that I think is reasonable. Um, it's 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 one of those things where I also don't think of a title until the work is completely done. So there are people I've heard that will come up with a title and then they'll figure out the whole story based on the title kind of thing. I think that's pretty rare too, but I also think it's pretty rare for to leave it until the very 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 last thing. So I just want to kind of walk through some of the goofier aspects of my title brainstorming, which I think I spent a good chunk of about 2 days working on. So, and I have one friggin' page of work to come for it. A lot of that time was spent pacing in a circle, just trying to be I need to think of some kind of idea, kind of thing. So, anyway, my first thing that I wrote down for something that could fit in the title is the word heliotrope. It's the name of the ship that they're after. It's vague enough that it's not going to give too much of a hint as to what's happening in the story. It's a proper noun. It's like Murder on the Orient Express, right? So heliotrope, right? But then I was like, well, heliotrope starts with an H. Hyacinth starts with an H. So I was like, well, I definitely can't call it the Heliotrope Rescue, even though it technically is a Heliotrope Rescue. I need to do something better than that. So I thought, well, okay, so the story has some mystery aspects. What could I do with that? I'm like, okay, well, what about the phrase "the case of"? The case of is really common in mysteries. The case of the whatever, right? And so I thought, well, the case of the heliotrope, maybe. But what else could I point at, to try to spoil as little as possible in the title? And I thought, well, a big element in the first three chapters is an empty lifeboat. So what about the case of the empty lifeboat, or instead of the case of the empty lifeboat job or the empty lifeboat rescue? And I was like, well, let's keep rescue out of it. I thought, what about the word hostages? Because that's an element of the story. Is that too spoilery? I mean, obviously, I'm going to probably tell some people, those of you who happen to watch my videos, I'm going to tell some people that there's a hostage situation going on in this story. That's not really a spoiler. I mean, it's a spoiler in the sense that it happens, that you find out about it in chapter 3, but that's not that far in for a 22 chapter book. And it's kind of a big element of the plot, and maybe it's a good idea to talk about hostages. It pops out, right? Maybe not. I thought about the word heist. What about the heliotrope heist? There's both value and cringe in alliteration, right? So I was like, maybe. And then I thought of the phrase "on the trail of," and I was like, "On the trail of." Okay, "on the trail of" is kind of a nice phrase. It's not the case of, but it kind of describes what they're doing. They're on the trail of a thing, on the trail of an empty lifeboat, and then somehow I think I was getting hungry or something, because I was like, how about following an empty lifeboat? And I was like, oh no, that's not so good. Let's keep moving. But the word following got me thinking. I'm like, well, what are other words for following? So I'm poking through a thesaurus and tracking, tracing, trailing the heliotrope. Trailing the heliotrope's not terrible. And then, I was like, well, what about, maybe, but I still don't like trailing the heliotrope. It's just not there. I was like, I mean, this is something, but I don't think it's my end point. I thought about just calling the book the OCS Heliotrope, right? OCS would stand for Orland Corporation ship, right? I thought the heliotrope extrication is on this piece of paper for some reason, and I feel like extrication isn't even the right word. So I must have really been getting hungry or something. I thought about trailing or tracking the Heliotrope's crew, because they're not tracking the Heliotrope through most of the story. They're tracking their crew, right? So maybe is that too spoilery? Is that too wordy? Being extra over wordy is a problem with everything except for light novels, right? And if I was going to do a light novel, I'd need to find an illustrator, so that's just not going to happen. Then I'm pretty sure I was really getting hungry, because you ever watch Red Letter Media videos? You ever watch what is it? What's it called? Best of the Worst, right? Or no, not even Best of the Worst. It's the spinny one, the Wheel of the Worst, right? I guess technically that's part of Best of the Worst, but they did this one thing where they like found this weird Japanese music video VHS tape, and I think I was thinking about that, like that episode of Best of the Worst, because they have this song where it's like SOS, and so I came up with like Lonely SOS. I'm like, I mean, technically that's correct, but that sounds very English as a second language, specifically Japanese. Like that's a very Japan English kind of thing. And so I was like, okay, I need to stop. And so I set it aside. I went and had lunch. And I said, you know what, I'm going to work on something else for the rest of the day, because I'm clearly I'm losing it here with Lonely SOS. So I came back the next day, and I'm like, okay, obviously that's bad. We're just going to get rid of that. We're not even going to think about that. But what else? Let's try to think of something original and not just putting together little pieces like I did yesterday. So I came up with Signals in the Dark. It's okay, but there's not really a lot of signals going back and forth across space in the story. That's part of the problem, right? Like, it's not like the people who are on the ship are sending them, smoke signals, and they're picking them up and following the trail of breadcrumbs. They have to come up with something else. I came up with, message in a bottle, but not just a bottle, because the special thing about the lifeboat, other than it being empty, right, is that it has an FTL drive on it, a shelf drive. So message in a light speed bottle, message in a faster than light bottle. I'm kind of thinking about that. I have the phrase faster than light down here on right below. And then I hit on something that's pretty close. The hunt for the heliotrope. And I'm thinking hunt for an October kind of thing, right? Again, we've got that alliteration, and unless it's really good, try to avoid it kind of thing, maybe. I don't know. I came up with, what about the word search? The search for the heliotrope. On the trail of the heliotrope. I was kind of pacing back and forth in my living room, so I like the faster than light thing. What can we do with that? And I came up with what ended up being the subtitle, the tagline of the book, which is a cryptic message in a faster than light bottle. You can see it on the bottom of the cover image. And, I have an arrow pointing to it. Subtitle / flavor text ? I have on the trail of the heliotrope, on the trail of a faster than light bottle. Then I kind of was like, okay, there's something here, but I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too much into a pigeonhole here. Let's back out again. And I was like, what other phrases might be interesting? I came up with just a trace, and this one's clumsier, but barely a trail. I'm like, well, barely a trail is descriptive, but it does sound very clunky. I thought a trail across the stars, and I almost went with a trail across the stars or a trail among the stars. I even went to the trouble of looking to see if there was already a book with that title in print, and I didn't find anything. So I'm maybe, but let's keep thinking. I thought of pursuit between stars, and this is the first time that I wrote pursuit on the paper. So I'm like, oh, pursuit. That's kind of a good word. It's strong. It's descriptive. I for some reason I have the word imprints on here. I guess I'm thinking of imprints between the stars, but I threw that one away pretty quickly because I'm like, well, there's no imprint at all. There's no what? What are you talking about? But then I kept going with the across the stars idea. I was like, traced across the stars. Traced isn't the right word. What about trailed or tracked? I'm like, trail. Trail is an interesting word. And I thought, like, okay, so this, it's basically these ships that are going across vast quantities of space, and their trail is like a trail of superheated gas, right? That's kind of rapidly cooling down. I'm thinking about like the temperature of the gas that has been let out of the ship, kind of thing, for propulsion purposes. And so I was like, well, like before the trail cools, or betrayal before the trail goes cold. I have those both written down here. And then I'm like, well, wait a minute. Could I work in? And this is, again, I think I was getting hungry or something, because I was like, well, can I work in like the microwave background radiation temperature into this, which is about 3 Kelvin? And I was like, well, maybe. Like, what about like on a trail just warmer than 3 Kelvin? I'm like, it's too long, right? It's just too many words in that. What about just a trail just warmer than 3 Kelvin? Again, still pretty long, shorter, because I got rid of that on, which, is a superfluous word, but maybe. When I was thinking of like the word warmer, I'm like, could I switch it to over or above? And would it be better as just or barely? Like on like a trail barely warmer than 3 Kelvin, a trail barely above 3 Kelvin. And finally I was like, well, these are all just too long. And the 3 Kelvin thing, people will probably get it, but I don't feel like it. They never actually do trail, like a heat trail. Like, that's not something that actually happens in the story. So it might even be a little bit, like, give the false impression that they're like bloodhounds kind of thing. And so then I'm kind of going back. I'm going back to the trail, the trace, the pursuit. Now I'm thinking of the word pursuit. Pursuit, and then I'm like, okay, well, wait, what was the thing I wanted to add in yesterday? It was heliotrope. Well, what would it be? Pursuit, heliotrope, pursuit across the stars, pursuit of the heliotrope, pursuit, and that was where I finally came up with what ended up being the title of this story. Pursuit of the Heliotrope, with the subtitle or the flavor text or whatever on the trail of a cryptic message in a faster than light bottle. So you can see I've got the name of the ship, which was like the first word that I wrote down. So, don't throw away that first word that you write down, even though maybe you don't, use it the way that you think you were going to use it. I have the word pursuit, which I didn't come up with until the second day. I have this cryptic message in a faster than light bottle thing, but I took that, instead of having it be part of the title, I just kind of put it in a tagline, and I thought maybe, I don't know, I kind of like that phrase. It's too long to be part of the title, right? But it is something that like a lot of books these days have a tagline. So I was like, what the hell? Let's try that out. I don't think I've ever done taglines before, so why not give it a shot? And that's where the title came from. You can see that there was a lot of, and really, I did spend probably 3 solid hours each day for 2 days thinking about this. And most of this time was me pacing in a circle, trying to think of like new words, or looking at a thesaurus, or like just jotting down things. And there's a bunch of arrows and stuff all over this piece of paper of me like coming up with a word and then trying to connect it to other words that I had thought of already. I don't know. I thought this was kind of fun and funny, especially that lonely SOS thing. Like I did that, and I was like, I need to go get some food, because this is just not. Clearly, I am out of my mind, and I have spent enough time on this today, so I'm going to come back to it fresh tomorrow and not come up with garbage like that. But there is a lot of garbage here, right? And not necessarily all garbage, but like barely a trail. Come on, that's trash. Barely is a word that might work, but it's not really a good title word. And then trail could work, but again, like, it's not really actually descriptive of what's happening in the story. I ended up using the first word that I came up with and one of the last ones and putting them together with a couple of linking words. One of the things that I discovered is I went and I looked over all of my like Nero Wolfe books, because I was like, even though this is a story in like a science fiction like setting, the story really is kind of like more closer to like a mystery or like a rescue story. And so like I went back and I looked at a bunch of different Agatha Christie novels. I looked at my Nero Wolfe collection. I'm like, most of these titles are like two important words or maybe three important words and then a couple of connecting words maybe. Death of a Doxy, right? That's a Nero Wolfe book. So I was like, let's try to keep it, kind of in that length. I had that on a trail just above 3 Kelvin thing. I was like, there's something here, but at the same time, it doesn't actually describe what's going on in the story. And so people might think it's misleading when they get into the book. I don't want to mislead people with the title necessarily. I don't want to spoil too much either. And so I was like, well, let's I had the idea for putting the word hostages in there in the first day, and the second day I was like, no, I don't know that I'm going to do that. I had, the idea of a trail across the stars, which is still, I think, an okay idea for a title, but it's so very, very, very vague that, it could be a book on astrology for all you know. So, I ended up reaching this conclusion. I came up with a lot of garbage, and so, similarly to you, if you are working on a title for a short story, novella, novel, whatever, don't be afraid to screw up like I did. But make sure that you recognize when you've screwed up, like I fortunately was able to. Because, I mean, my God, could you imagine this book coming out under the title of Lonely SOS? Garbage. Anyway, that's what I've got for today. I thought that would be kind of fun, illustrative of my particular thought process. Because, again, I'm kind of bad at titles. And so maybe this is kind of like a me problem where it's like, oh, I spent 2 days, 6 hours over the course of 2 days fumbling around with words trying to come up with a good title. Maybe that's what other people do too. I don't know. Anyway, I hope this was at least a little bit entertaining, maybe helpful to see that, you got to make a lot of mistakes before you come up with something that you actually like. Sometimes it's okay to kind of go down a rabbit hole a little bit and play around with something, right? Like I had that warmer than 3 Kelvin thing, and I played around with that for a good hour. Like, well, can I cut this word? I don't need the word than in there, right? Like warmer than 3 Kelvin, I can cut that to over 3 Kelvin, and that cuts a word down, right? I don't need on a trail, it can just be a trail, right? And then, I had barely and just, and I need a word there to say that we're just over 3 Kelvin, right? We're just over the microwave radiation background. But in the end, even though I spent an hour fiddling with that, it just came out to being basically nothing, which is unfortunate, but I don't know. That's how it goes for me sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm fairly satisfied with the title that I came up with. It doesn't spoil too much, but it does accurately describe kind of part of what's happening in the early part of the story. It does have a unique word in it, so it's not like, it's not some title that could be used 100 different times for 100 different stories, and it gets lost in the ether that way, right? I came up with what I think is a pretty neat little tagline. Again, kind of hints on stuff that's going on in the first couple of chapters without spoiling too much about what happens later. But again, it's longer, and so I used it not as a subtitle even, but just as a little thing that goes on the bottom of the cover. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I hope this is kind of interesting to somebody. But basically, the lesson to be learned is don't give up. You will eventually come up with some kind of good title, even if you end up playing with a bunch of garbage at the same time. You will eventually, find your way there. I hope. Just keep trying, because I mean, 3 hours a day for 2 days was more time than I expected to spend on it, but it took that long before I came to something that was short, descriptive, unique, etc. So, as always, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. It is Friday, so I hope you all have a good weekend, and I'll see you next time. My copy of The Andromeda Strain should be coming in, so I may do a review of that next week, because I read a lot of Crichton when I was a kid, early high school kind of times, right? And Andromeda Strain is one of the books that I read several times because I liked it a lot. Sphere is actually another one like that. I actually like those more than Jurassic Park, honestly. But I did read a lot of Crichton back then, and I haven't read them in a long time, so I thought it'd be fun to go back and look upon that, and see what I think of it today. Because I really enjoyed it back then. So, anyway, that's what I've got for today. Have a good weekend, and I will see you next time.